Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Road to 2000. As always, my name is Caleb Denby, and I will be your driver on this journey. I have a pretty fun class prepared for you tonight. I want to go over some pretty famous Kasparov games in which he took down the Queen's Gambit declined. And hello, Oliver, who's just walking in. And so I want to look at this plan that Garry Kasparov was famous for playing. I don't know if he's probably not the first person to play it or popularize it, but he played it enough and won enough chess games that the name kind of stuck. A lot of people call it the Kasparov plan. So to start with, we're going to look at this game between Kasparov and Ulf Andersson. Of course, we start with d4, knight f6, c4, and e6. And I actually want to pause for a brief moment here. If you've played much chess, you've probably seen this position before. It's one of the most common positions right out of the opening. And you might know that the two most common moves are knight c3 and knight f3. So who can tell me why a lot of people these days are playing knight f3? Anybody in the audience? What are they trying to avoid with knight f3? You might know this one, Oliver. There's an opening that gives white a lot of problems that white's trying to avoid. So not quite bishop g5. We're looking for an opening for black. And so what does knight c3 allow? Let me phrase it a little differently. What openings can black choose from here? And yeah, the YouTube chat does have it. So the Nimzo Indian. This move bishop b4 before black has committed to this move d5. A lot of top grandmasters these days aren't so happy allowing the Nimzo Indian. They think it lets black kind of equalize. So you see a lot of top grandmasters play this move knight f3. But today we are actually going to be looking at this knight c3 move order. This is actually what I have in my repertoire because I'm not so afraid of the Nimzo Indian. I quite like this f3 line, and I'm sure you might have seen one of the numerous lectures I've taught on that. But today we're going to look at this line with d5. And we're going to see why this move order can actually be advantageous for white. Because if it were as simple as allowing the Nimzo or not allowing the Nimzo, if it's all going to be the same in the ends, then probably you just shouldn't allow the Nimzo Indian, right? Like, why not play knight f3 and just not allow bishop b4? Yeah?
How does that, by moving that knight to that position right there, how does that stop the Nimzo Indian attack?
Yeah, so the key point of the Nimzo is that after bishop b4, we're actually pinning this knight to the king. And this is going to be a problem for white to deal with in the opening. Obviously, white has many, many options here, but this immediate pin on the knight is what leads to these variations where black is getting equality just a little bit more easily than, for example, in something like the Rogozin. Because here, black has already committed to this move d5, and that limits his options a little bit. So by playing knight f3, now if black were to try to say the same thing, this would be a perfectly acceptable move. But for example, white doesn't have to step into the pin. White could play something like bishop d2 and step out of it. So that's the idea behind knight f3. So what is the point of playing knight c3? Well, the point is after d5, if black does not play the Nimzo Indian, then we are actually going to have a really interesting option here. We can play the Kasparov plan against the Queen's Gambit declined. And we'll see it's really important that we have not yet developed this knight out to f3. So what is Kasparov's plan? Well, first and foremost, he actually exchanges on d5. And we're going to be looking at e takes d5 today. Knight takes d5 is a playable move, but this one it does get a little scary for black because white is able to build a pretty big center right away. So e takes d5 is more natural. Then we're going to come out with bishop g5, get the bishop outside the pawn chain. c6 is always a good move for black. You want to shore up the d5 pawn a little bit. And then here, Kasparov plays an early queen c2. So why is white playing queen c2 here instead of something like e3, for example? What is Kasparov hoping to avoid with this move order? Diving into all the little subtleties here.
Keeping from castling?
So not quite castling, but queen c2 is preventing a really nice developing move that black wants to play. So after e3, what developing move might be allowed by not having this queen on c2? Yeah, Oliver?
Bishop g5.
Not g5. This square is g5.
Oh yeah, bishop g4.
Bishop g4? Well, bishop g4 is playable here anyways, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's playable in this position as well. So the move is actually bishop f5, which you might not expect at first glance, because it looks like white's going to have a really nice move here in the form of queen f3. It's going to attack this bishop, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on this knight on f6. But amazingly, it turns out that black is probably not doing so badly in this line, where the queens come off the board. And even though your pawns look sort of awful, a lot of work has been done here, and black tends to get an equal position. So the reason why Kasparov plays queen c2 here is it just cuts out that line altogether. And these are the little opening subtleties that kind of get skipped over when you just see these games kind of off the cuff. So queen c2 here, and the idea is to stop this early bishop f5. Okay, Ulf Andersson continues developing normally then with bishop e7, and now it's finally time for us to just play e3, get developed. Black's going to develop the knight because we don't have this comfortable bishop f5 move anymore. Now we go bishop d3, castles, and then here the key point is that it was really important that we didn't put our knight on f3, because Kasparov's plan is to actually put this knight onto e2. Now, who can guess why we want this knight on e2 rather than the more natural square of f3? Because looking at the knight alone, it really looks like we would like to control the e5 square, help defend our bishop, and potentially play something like knight e5 someday. So what's the point? Why is this knight on e2? What's Kasparov aiming for here?
You long castle and be able to push the f-pawn?
Yeah, so long castles is going to be an important idea that we'll see here. But the idea is actually not to push the f-pawn sort of just down the board like f4, f5. It's more about controlling this key square on e4. If you're familiar with the Carlsbad structure, which is what we have here, just talking about the pawns alone, you might know, especially if you've seen some of my lectures, about the minority attack. You know, you push these pawns on the queen side, you try to take on c6 and create a weakness. And that's sort of the quote-unquote standard way of playing the position. And that's the type of plan you would go for after something with like knight f3. You would want to play rook b1, push this pawn forward, and again, try to make a weakness on the queen side. Instead, with knight e2, we're actually going for an entirely different plan. White's idea is to not play f4, but just play f3. And we can actually play f3 and still castle kingside. We're not like wrecking our king or anything. Or, you know, potentially we'll see that castle's queenside is played sometimes. The point of f3 is actually just that Kasparov wants to push down the center of the board and actually use this extra central pawn that he has, this e pawn, where black doesn't have one. And he wants to use this to get a space advantage in the center. If he can build just a big center, he's hoping that the black pieces will run out of squares and things will start to fall. And that is the crux of this plan. So we see all these opening subtleties. We allow the Nimzo Indian with knight c3 because we don't yet want to commit our knight to the f3 square. Then we saw this queen c2 move, preventing this early development by black. And then we're just finishing our development here with knight g to e2. So all those different little move order subtleties are coming together. So now we get the move rook to e8. Very common idea. Black's pieces are a little bit cramped, and this move actually allows them to get access to the critical f8 square, to potentially reroute, open up this bishop. And there's potentially another idea that black has in mind that I wanted to mention. So after castles, I want to ask you if you've heard of this like Lasker freeing maneuver in these positions. This one's sort of a deep cut, but Lasker had a nice freeing idea that you would especially see if this knight were on f3. So imagine this knight's on f3, and do you know a good freeing plan for black here? What do I mean by freeing? Well, I mean black's pieces are really cramped. He would love to trade some pieces and potentially occupy the center, but you need to do it in a pretty clever way. So let's see if you know the Lasker plan. Yeah, Oliver, what do you think?
After if the knight was on f3, we could go knight e5.
If the knight were on f3, what move?
E4.
Yeah, knight e4. So knight e4. And then what's actually happening here that you might not expect?
Because if he goes
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is sort of the point of the Lasker idea, is that it looks like it's sort of suicide to bring this knight to e4. It's attacked 3 times and only defended once by the pawn. So you would expect to be losing some material here. But actually, it's important that this bishop on g5 is attacked. If we were to take on e7, we can play queen takes e7. And then actually, we have just enough defenders of our knight on e4 to not be losing material. But in this case, thanks to our move order, this is actually not going to be the best move after all for black in this position. And I want to show you a really fun tactic that you might not expect. So you can start with bishop f4, I believe, actually. So bishop f4. And now all of a sudden, black sort of has this problem with this knight here on e4. If you were to take on c3, you might even be running into bishop takes h7. I'm not so sure. But yeah, let's say bishop takes h7, king h8, and then I'm sort of ad-libbing a little bit here, but I think my point stands. So knight takes c3. Then I want to ask you what happens after g6. There's the obvious sacrifice, which might be good for white. There's actually a really nice tactic here that is rather uncommon. OK, I lied. I don't want to do it in this position. I'll show you a different position. Let's say black just brings this knight back to f6 and claims that he unpinned his piece, and that's a success. See if you can find a nice tactic here. And yeah, hello to the YouTube audience. And the YouTube audience already has it. They're too clever for me. Hello to Ridox in the chat. So really fun tactic here. And it really just highlights how clustered all these black pieces are and how in the way of each other they're sort of getting. This position's actually just dead lost for black, by the way. It's over. Oliver, I know you've got a tactical mind. You've tricked me before. Can you trick black here? What do you think, Oliver?
Knight b5?
Yeah, knight b5. This move is nasty. Very, very difficult to deal with. The point is, this queen is actually kind of checkmated, to borrow the word. If you take this knight, bishop c7, and the queen is literally in a box. It is boxed in as boxed in can be, and that's going to be the game. Of course, if you sort of deal with this problem somehow by giving the queen a square, things aren't going to get much better for you after just something like knight c7, and even knight e6 here with the double attack. What's the question, Oliver?
Yeah, here, if knights, here, why can't black go like knight b6?
Knight b6, so same problem. We're just going to go knight c7, and you've got all these issues to deal with. So just wanted to highlight that this Lasker plan is actually not going to be so good here. On top of that, white can do other things and probably keep a slight advantage. Even capturing here can be quite nice for white. Generally, black would want to take on g5, but that's actually not going to work here because we can take on h7 with check and pick up an extra pawn. So black would have to take on e4. And then even after takes on e7, takes on e7, black's just going to have to struggle a little bit to deal with this pawn on e4. And now this wouldn't be as much of a concern if our knight were on f3, because black would be winning some time, attacking this knight and along with other ideas. So the point is, this freeing idea of knight e4 isn't going to be so good for black here, which is why black tries to potentially prepare it with this move knight f8. Now a lot of those problems that we saw for black are going to go away. For one, he's defending his h7 pawn. And if we were to play some kind of slow move, knight e4 might actually be a good idea now. If we can take here. No longer is this a threat. And bishop f4 actually is coming without a threat. Our queen has space now, has space to move around. So of course, what move is it time for? What is it time for here?
Take that knight out, the defender of h7.
Yeah, so the problem is black has 2 defenders here, so we're not going to be able to win tactically anymore. Black played nice and solid. Ben Feingold would never. That's my hints. Ben Feingold would never play this move. Ben Simon has the answers. So we want to stop black from freeing his pieces like this. This Lasker idea is actually a pretty nice way to just, solve those early opening problems for black, get the pieces in the game, and deal with your lack of space. So we're just going to play f3 and quite directly stop this knight from jumping into e4. Now, of course, none of the tactics are going to work out for black anymore. There's no fancy tricks. We just take on e7 and then take on e4. No time for in-between moves because your queen is attacked. So f3 comes on the board for Garry Kasparov. And you start to see how uncomfortable these games can be for black unless you're very, very confident in what you're doing. Because not only are we advancing our plan, right? We're making progress towards playing e4, but it seems like at every turn, whenever black is close to freeing his pieces with something like knight to e4, he kind of gets shut down just by a single tempo. So important that you don't waste time in an opening like this, even though it seems kind of relatively tame or calm compared to open Sicilians or whatever. But time is always going to be important in chess. So f3 now. And black's not going to give up, of course. He comes up with this move, bishop to e6. So black's ideas to free himself on the king's side have sort of faltered at this point. So black, instead of settling for bishop e6, which is defending this d5 pawn, sort of overprotecting this piece, to borrow Nimzovich's terminology. So what does this move sort of signal? You might be able to see it coming from a ways away. Why would black want to defend this pawn a whole lot?
Looking to break it in the center with c5?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We need this extra defense of d5 because before white gets off the ground with e4, black is trying to play this move c5 at some point and sort of open things up and get some activity for himself. So with that in mind, what improving move can we make that sort of discourages this move, c5? I'll give you hints. All these pieces are in pretty good position here, so it's time to bring in the rooks. What do you think, Oliver?
E4?
No, not e4. So we'll talk about why e4 is not good yet, but we want to keep it simple. We want to continue preparing this break in the center, and we can do so with just a nice developing move.
A3?
Okay, so a3, I don't know if that's going to be quite enough. I think your heart's in the right place. Against rook c8, what did you want to do?
I was just going to bring e4 up after that.
Yeah, so I think this would be a great idea. If white were able to get this sort of lock on the c5 score like this, I think this would be great. But the problem is I think black's going to meet you on a3 with something like a5. And then b4 is going to be a little bit too hard to manufacture here. If you try to prepare it more, I think you might just end up wasting a little bit too much time. And I don't know, let's see even a move like knight 6 to d7. And you're sort of heading in the wrong direction, mixing ideas a little bit. This a3, b4 stuff is good when our knight's on f3, but here we're focusing more on the center,
Bring rook a d1.
So that's actually my favorite move in the position. Rook a d1. I think in this game, Kasparov chose the other one. Yeah, Kasparov did choose the other one. But I like this move, rook a d1. So what does this do to discourage c5? Well, let's take a look. Let's say something like rook c8. We'll see that king h1 is a good move, and I'll explain why in a little bit. And c5. So what is our point? Why is our rook on d1? How does this discourage c5?
You set up bishop takes h7 with an attack on whatever piece lines up there, if it's actual minor piece or something.
Okay, I'm a little confused. Oh, okay, bishop takes h7 with the rook on the d file. So that's one of the tactical ideas in the position, but just more basic than that, we're going to look to open the d file, and we're happy to have our rook on this newly opened file. So this is the kind of anticipation that really helps you decide where to put your pieces. You think, what is my opponent going for? And you think, where's the best spot to put my pieces to sort of combat that idea? So rook ad1 is my choice for the position, but Kasparov in this instance actually chooses to go rook a to e1 instead, which is also just a perfectly fine move, but I like discouraging c5 a little bit more because I think it's a very human plan. You know, it turns out that these positions for black, let's say king h1, c5, these positions turn out to just not be so good for black. We can play something like knight to d4, and it turns out our pieces are a little bit too active, this pawn's a little bit too weak, and white's going to be a bit better. But I think it's a very human way to play, which is why I like rook d1. Instead, though, we get rook a to e1, and black follows up with rook to c8. And again, we're going to play this move king to h1. So I think it's time to stop and talk about Oliver's suggestion here. Why are we playing all these sort of preparatory moves? Why aren't we just busting through the center with a move like e4? What do you think black's idea is going to be in these positions? You know, why wait? Why all the preparation? Why not just break in the center? So this looks kind of scary for black at first. Looks a little bit scary. So the chat's pointing out some important ideas. They're noticing that d takes e4 is an important option for black. And that's going to be an important option for a couple of reasons. So let's stick with this move first. So what does this move do for black? Well, it opens the d file, which is going to let black put a little bit of extra pressure on this d pawn. Notably, we only have this pawn defended one time, so this pressure might actually become important. And secondly, how would white like to recapture this pawn on e4? With the knight, the bishop, or the pawn?
Pawn.
Yeah, of course, the pawn. You want to build this strong central duo. But taking with the pawn actually undefends a really important square in the position. So what square is that? And what is black's big idea here? Because if black doesn't have an idea, we would love to do this. Love to have these central pawns, love to have this open f file, and just kind of crush.
Knight g4 would set up a fork next turn.
Yeah, knight g4 sets up a fork, like you said, and on the surface that seems a little bit artificial, right? Seems like a one-move threat. Obviously, white's not going to hang the fork. But it turns out that this is actually a really difficult move to deal with. For example, let's say we take. Let's say queen takes. Now you have to deal with this threat somehow. You don't really want to play queen to d2. I guess you could play something like rook to f3, but already, you know, you're getting a little bit uncomfortable here with white. You're getting a little bit uncomfortable. Lots of threats are happening over here on the king's side directly. And I'm going to cheat a little bit so I don't embarrass myself. Okay, queen h4 is not a good move. But okay, the other idea, c5, is really, really important. And you see that we don't have enough defenders of our d pawn. And so our dark squares start to fall. So for example, something like d5 seems very, very natural. But now all of a sudden, you're giving up all sorts of squares. And black has ideas like c4 here. Takes, okay, and even takes, and this bishop is amazingly kind of trapped. But ideas like queen to c5 are going to be very important as well. And the dark squares are very, very quick to sort of collapse in the position once you break through with e4. So for those reasons, that's why you see preparatory moves like rook to e1. And in my instance, I like rook to d1 because it just gets to the heart of the problem. It helps defend our weak d4 pawn. But rook e1 by Kasparov, and then even this move king to h1. So from a long distance away, Kasparov is anticipating ideas of this diagonal becoming weak once we loosen up our dark squares, and ideas of stuff like knight g4 as well. So he sees these ideas coming, and he's playing these preparatory moves. And the reason why white has the luxury of doing this is he's got a really nice hold on the position. You know, black's only idea here to get active is to play this move c5, and that move's not going to be so good, as we've seen. And so since we have this nice grip on the position, black sort of just has to let us do what we want in the position. So why wouldn't we spend all of our time improving all of our pieces? Because here, white's moves to prepare for the break in the center are just more effective than black's because we have a little bit more space. You see all these pieces in each other's way, and white's pieces coming to very natural squares. So that's why we spend so much time preparing the move e4, because we can afford to. You know, black's not really getting active, and we are happy to spend the time. So with black, you're in a rather difficult position here. You don't have this knight e4 idea. We've seen that these ideas with c5 just aren't going to be good enough. Knight d4 is good. This would be a symmetrical structure, by the way, but the two bishops are going to be very advantageous for white. And if you don't take, well, we just have all this pressure. Our bishop's open, our knight is threatening to jump in, and this pawn is going to be weak in the long term. So good position for white. So if you don't have c5, you don't have freeing ideas like knight e4, you start to ask yourself, well, what do you do here? So I'm going to ask you that question. What do you think Ulf Andersson came up with? What did Ulf come up with here? So we've sort of been talking about this principle indirectly, but when you have less space, it's good to trade pieces, because the fewer pieces you have, the less cramped you feel in that small space. They don't get in each other's way anymore, and you can move a bit more freely. All right, what do you think, Oliver?
I was thinking we should go, like, for example, bishop takes f6.
Well, it's black's turn, and black wants to trade pieces.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, for white, bishop takes f6 would be a big mistake
Knight
for a lot of reasons. Yeah, so knight g4 isn't going to quite work out tactically. We can still take on e7. You don't even have time to take on e3, because we can just take your queen. But you've got the right idea. You need to deal with the pressure on this diagonal.
Knight e5. Knight e4.
We've talked about knight e4. And the reason why this isn't any good is because, remember, we played this move f3 specifically to stop this idea. But what if you played a move with the knight that didn't hang the knight?
Knight b6, d2, d7.
Yeah, and just knight 6 to d7 is what Ulf Andersson played in the game. And it's not a bad idea, but it turns out that, you know, whenever you're moving in the wrong direction like this, whenever you're retreating like this, obviously you give up some control over central squares. And yes, you get to trade some pieces, but it's going to let Kasparov maneuver a little bit even more freely than he could before. So bishop takes on e7, rook takes on e7 is actually what Ulf Andersson goes for here. And here, I think Kasparov could finally get away with something like e4. I don't think e4 is a bad move at all in this position. And let me make sure I'm not missing something obvious. E4, yeah, you can finally get away with it, and it's not a bad idea. But again, black is ready at any moment to break through with c5. And again, you don't really want to play d5 just yet because of these tricky ideas with c4. And also, you're just giving up this e5 square. So we could play e4, but we're not quite happy with it yet. So Kasparov actually prepares it even further with knight to f4. Then after rook to c7. Kind of a weird move, but he's actually connecting his rooks in a weird way. And then Garry finds this nice idea of queen to f2. So remember, our problem in all the variations wasn't the e4 square. We have that square very well defended, but we were a little bit short on defenders of our d4 pawn. So queen f2 helps defend this pawn a little bit. And now, after knight to f6, the time is finally right. we've dealt with these c5, c4 tactics. Our bishop has flight squares. And we're finally ready now to break through with e4. Again, this knight g4 idea isn't even going to be much of a problem, as we'll see. So e4 finally comes through. In the game, Ulf does capture, and we're going to take back with the pawn. And let's see if you can find what's going on after something like knight g4. So we were worried about this move earlier, but what's the story now?
Queen to G3.
Yeah, so queen g3, what happens if black does end up taking our guy?
Push the H pawn to H3.
Okay, so you can play h3. I was thinking you might try to go for something like this knight takes e6 idea, removing the defender of the knight. But after knight takes, it's actually still going to remain a little bit complicated here, because if you take the knight, it's going to take on d3, and I'm not totally sure what's going on here. So we do have to be a little careful here.
Would you like to move the queen over to h4 and set up a pawn push to threaten checkmate? Not sure how well that turns out.
Yeah, so I think it might be a little bit too slow. For example, this knight does still defend our bishop now, so you could play something like e5. Oh boy, but I think knight g6 should be okay. Well, first of all, okay, this doesn't even threaten checkmate, but knight g6 would be a good way to free. But maybe the answer is even more simple. We just take, and this is still defended. So I think surprisingly, the move queen to g1 is a really nice idea here. The chat pointed out knight takes e6, but unfortunately this move is check. So that one will get us. But yeah, I think just queen g1, and white is still doing well. Yeah, you just go queen back to g1. And again, the move king h1 actually comes in handy. It's all about these dark squares whenever you play e4. Very, very rarely will the e4 pawn be the problem. It's about making sure you have those dark squares under control. And white's just doing well here. So a couple things to look out for before you can play the e4 break. You have to be aware of this c5, c4 plan. Make sure you have something ready against that. You also have to be aware of this move knight g4. Make sure you're prepared to meet that effectively. And if you can deal with those two things, and it looks like everything is holding together, then the time might finally be right to play the move e4. So here, knight f6, we're finally ready with e4. Now in the game, Ulf does capture. We take back with the f pawn. I guess it's important to point out what happens if black doesn't capture. Well, first of all, it's kind of hard to play a move, but secondly, we're just going to break through with e5, open up this diagonal. And then our plan becomes very simple. We push the f pawn down the board, and black is going to be in deep, deep trouble. So takes on e4, f takes e4. We get rook c d7, and now d5. And it's all about calculation from this point. Once you play e4, your grip on the position is sort of going away. The files are going to open up. The black pieces are going to have things to do. And so you have to be ready to sort of strike while the iron is hot, as they say. So e4, takes, rook to d7. Black already has a lot of pressure here. I guess it might be possible to try to play a slower move, like knight back to e2, knight f e2, just defending the pawn. But you don't really want to allow things like c5 and trying to open things up again. So d5 for white is good. It opens up this diagonal, And believe it or not, Kasparov isn't joking about taking an a7 pawn. You know, a pawn is a pawn. And in the game, we actually get c takes d. Nice little intermezzo with bishop to b5. This is why this tactic kind of works. Rook back to c7, and now we can take on d5. Bishop d7 in the game. Of course, what happens if we do get carried away and try to take on d5? What happens to black here? Yeah, I think the YouTube chat has the right idea. These are just unfortunately placed pieces for black, and we can pin them up with rook to d1. You might be able to throw in knight takes first, and then rook d1, but actually, no, you probably don't want to allow things like rook e5. So just rook to d1, and the knight's pinned, and there's no way to save everything for black. You can sacrifice the rook, I guess, to try and keep it together. But even here, it's very difficult to unpin. You can't really move this queen away. Otherwise, we're going to take. So deep trouble for black there. And so Garry Kasparov calculates his way to this position, where the d pawn is going to survive. It's now actually a passed pawn, and black is in a lot of trouble. So what happens if we try to fork black with d6, first of all? Is Ulf Andersson just a dummy? Did he just hang the pawn fork? Spoilers, Ulf Andersson's not a dummy, unfortunately.
Split in between rook takes e1.
Yeah, just the simple tactic, rook takes on e1, and this rook is no longer, well, both rooks are no longer attacked, so you can save this piece. So no d6. We would much rather have this pawn on d5, where it harasses this knight on e6 and controls these important squares for black. So instead, Kasparov just retreats the bishop and keeps the grip. We get rook back to c8. Now after bishop e2, this was a threat, of course. Rook c8, and then Kasparov finally takes on a7. And from here, we see b6, and d6 is a nice sacrifice. This is Kasparov being Kasparov, but this is a little bit beyond the scope of the class. Garry wins the b6 pawn now, trades the queens, and goes into this winning endgame, which, of course, you know, Garry is able to win because he's Garry. Just pushes the pawn, and Ulf Andersson resigns. But the point I wanted to focus on was this beginning stages here. We saw all these intricacies, this queen c2 move order, this f3 idea, stopping knight e4 in its tracks, making sure we always had these freeing maneuvers in mind for black, and then eventually these preparing moves, keeping in mind the knight g4 and the c5 ideas, finally knight f4, and we break through with our e4 break at exactly the right moment, pressuring on the queen's side, breaking through in the center, keeping these tactical ideas in mind. And that is sort of the crux of the Kasparov plan. This is pretty much the model game for showing off this plan. Garry did pretty much everything right in the game, and he got a winning position because of it. So any questions on this game before we look at one or two more examples? Questions here?
Something I
Yeah.
see really commonly would be when your knight is pinned to the queen and you have the bishop in between even. Right here.
Yeah, so
I mean, like everyone I ever play will just play h6 and then g5.
h6, g5?
If
Okay.
you hold the pin. And what's like a practical game plan to punish that kind of overextension on the king's side?
Yeah, so we're actually going to look at a game where white castles queenside. And so, okay, let's I guess go a bit further in this game. Let's say in a position like this, right? This might be a good spot to show it. So black has sort of run out of useful moves, right? In the game, we saw Ulf comes up with bishop e6, rook c8, and eventually unpins with knight f to knight 6 to d7. But let's say instead, you know, they don't find that plan. They go h6, they go g5. Here we're actually probably going to put this bishop back on f2. And the problem for black is that this actually takes away a lot of squares in the black position. You can no longer play a move like knight g6. We're just going to capture that piece. You can no longer even ever really try to occupy the f5 square. And so white doesn't actually have to do anything special here. I think our normal game plan is still going to be perfectly fine. And it's just that black is going to have a lot of weaknesses on the king's side. So just to show like an example line, here I think we can, let's say, play king h1, rook c8, e4. And already I think black is going to be struggling a bit. For example, if you try knight g4, same idea as queen g1. We can go bishop g1. If you try c5, I think even the move e5. And notably, our bishop gives us a lot of coverage now, and we're kind of attacking on these light squares. Just to continue, let's say they try the c4 idea. We're just going to occupy the newly weakened light squares with something like bishop f5. And in this line, at least, black is just losing from what I can tell. So in this plan in particular, you don't have to do anything special. You just play your normal plan. Your bishop has a ready-made kind of nice little square here on f2. Yeah. And I think this move does nothing but weaken black's position in this case. Now, this idea is obviously going to show up in any opening under the sun, and sometimes it's going to be good, sometimes it's going to be bad, like here, and your response is going to have to be different sometimes. But just to show something else, let's say black does it a little bit earlier in a position like this. Say rook e8. Let's continue with f3, knight f8. In this position, for example, we haven't castled yet, and so ideas like h4, queenside castles, just to show, stuff like this is going to become a lot more relevant when you can just really make use of the g5 pawn, use it as a hook to open things up and attack the black king. But OK, good question. Good question. All right, anything else you guys want to talk about in these kinds of positions before we look at another example? What's up, Oliver?
I had a question over here. So what happens if like somebody plays like h6, for example, right now?
h6?
Yeah.
OK, well, if you were paying attention, we might have seen this position.
And then now if they would try to go knight e8.
OK. So we're fine. We can capture this. We can come back. Let's just say I take.
Yeah.
So yeah, black can get rid of these dark squared bishops with a move like knight e8. The problem is when you go backwards like this, it's going to take up a lot of your developing time. You know, you see this rook can no longer come in, and things are going in the wrong direction for black. It's going to give us time to play castles, something like rook e1, knight f4, f3, e4. And already, same plan as always. But yeah, this is a playable line for black, I suppose. But here especially, might make sense to just keep the bishops on the board as well. And again, we have our game plan. We have our game plan. OK, let us continue on here. Do you want to look at Ulf Andersson's attempt at an improvement or a different matchup entirely? Because Kasparov and Andersson actually played a number of games in this opening line. I'll leave it up to you guys. I think there's stuff to learn in both. OK, Ulf Andersson it is. Good talk, everybody. Ulf Andersson it is. Ulf Andersson number 2, the return. So I was having an interesting conversation with Dennis Forosh before the lecture here. These two games were actually played in the same year, both in World Cups, and I didn't understand what was going on. Turns out they played a series of World Cup tournaments in a Grand Prix style in 1988. But OK, that aside, we have Garry Kasparov against Ulf Andersson again. We're going to breeze past what is now common knowledge, our opening plan. Again, Kasparov goes for the early queen c2, get bishop e7, e3, knight bd7, bishop d3. And here, last time we saw stuff like castles, rook e8, knight f8, bishop e6. But now Ulf Andersson's taking a page out of Oliver's book here. He's saying, you know, I don't want to deal with this bishop at all. I'm playing knight h5 early on, and it's your job to show me what's going on. So in this case, we don't actually have a comfortable way to keep our bishop. You know, we don't really want to play knight f4, allow things, or bishop f4, allow things like knight f4. So we are just going to trade. We get queen takes e7. And now I want to ask you about black's devious plan. So a very clever person might say, OK, I still haven't decided between e2 or f3 for my knight. And now that the dark squared bishops are off the board, that might actually weaken this e5 square a little bit. So since black traded the dark square bishops, I think I'm going to go knight f3 and sort of switch my game plans again. Go after this e5 square. Try and make my opponent feel bad about his life decisions. But of course, black has a nice move here.
Knight f4?
Yeah, knight f4. Just taking advantage of this pin, and bishop f1 is definitely not what white has in mind. And I'm not sure the continuation here, but yeah, it's even something like knight f6. And yeah, let's just say knight f6. And now white's pieces are getting undeveloped. We don't mind bringing this knight to g6. It's white who has definitely wasted more time in this opening. So I don't like knight f3, but of course we can come back with knight g to e2, and this idea is gone. So now black continues being clever and plays this move g6. So a very, very different approach to what we saw last game. So g6. And we'll see what the idea is in a moment, but let's say white keeps it calm and castles kingside, which is perfectly natural. Black castles kingside, rook a to e1, knight d to f6, let's say knight c1, and knight g7. Okay, so after knight g7, hopefully you can see the point of black's play. So what is black intending with knight to g7? What do you think, Oliver?
Black is trying to go knight f5 and exchange the bishops.
Well, if you go knight f5, white's under no obligation to take that piece, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you can improve on that idea just a little bit.
To go knight e6 and then c5.
No, you had the right idea. It's all about the f5 square here. That's why we play g6. That's why we bring this knight back to g7.
Bishop f?
Yeah, bishop f5. That's the idea. So let's say I play h3. You go bishop f5. And now the point is, this is kind of white's best minor piece in this opening. It's the bishop on two long open diagonals looking into the position. And black is going to be very, very happy to just take back with the knight and fight for these light squares now. And black is doing perfectly fine here. So, of course, players with the white pieces try not to just directly allow this plan. In the line that we just looked at, rather than h3, I think f3 is normal. And now bishop f5 would be met by e4, I believe. And so this is one way to play, but we're going to look at Garry Kasparov's idea instead, which is against this plan in particular, rather than castling kingside, we're going to use the fact that black has made some slightly strange moves on the king side, and we're going to try to attack on that side of the board. So queenside castles is white's idea in this position. Now you notice, there's some dark squared weaknesses in the position. Moves like g4 are always going to come with tempo, which, by the way, there is an interesting line with g4. I think, if I can find it here. Did I make it up? Yeah, g4 even here is a potential move. So these moves aren't going unnoticed by white. So queenside castles in this game, though, is what we're focusing on. You get knight b6 for black, trying to reveal this bishop and occupy some squares on the queen side, now that that's where white's king is. In the game, Garry continues right away with knight to g3, the idea being he's happy to open up this h-file now that g6 has been played, weakening some things a little bit. Or in the game, we can see knight to g7, and white again is keeping a good grip over this f5 square, making sure that black is not able to occupy this square. King b1, played in the game, is always a nice move for white whenever you castle queenside. c-file oftentimes is going to open up. Oftentimes your a-pawn is weak, and it's just a good idea to play king b1. Now, Ulf Andersson goes for bishop d7, and we get this weird-looking move, rook to c1. So what's the point of rook to c1? Well, it's not too deep, I think. Black is looking to play stuff like c5, and white's looking to slow this idea down. Now in the game, we see queenside castles by black. So rather than castling kingside, when, again, white's going to have a lot of ideas to try and open things up. Stuff like h4, I think, might already be a good move. Yeah, stuff like h4. If you play something like h5, you do have to be very, very worried about ideas like this. We can start routing more pieces over here, and practically it's going to be difficult for black to play with those weak light squares. So castles queenside instead is the idea. And now Garry actually goes for this move, knight a4. We get takes, king out to b8. And Garry is actually now sort of attacking over here on the queen's side. So a very, very different way of playing the position, but it's kind of called for because of the weird moves that black plays in the opening to prevent the natural plan. So in this game, we actually get b6, bishop a6, knight e6, and rook hc1. And from here, it is honestly a very different way of playing the position, but it makes sense with how black has played. Black spends time over here on the king's side and castles his king to the queen's side, and that allows white to take this sort of initiative over here, doubling up on the c-file, putting pressure on the c-file, and giving black a difficult time. Okay, rook e8 played in the game. We're going to step off of this line here. We get queen to b3, queen to d6. And then finally, we're going to see another reroute by Garry Kasparov. We get this knight end to f1 and out to d2, just bringing more pieces over into the attack. Okay, knight to c7, bishop back to f1, stepping out of the threat. And we'll get to the point soon, I promise. g3, bishop g2, yet another reroute by Garry Kasparov. Rook c7, h4, rook to d8. And coming up here, you see that Garry, again, just sort of has a grip on the position. So in this case, black spends so much time on the king's side that Garry is able to take over the c-file. And again, just look at black's pieces. They're stuck behind each other. They're stuck behind the pawns. And white is able to just very comfortably apply all this pressure to the black structure. c5 is still the only real break in the position. And now after this nice maneuver of bishop f1 to g2, black is just never going to be able to achieve it. So in the game, we get knight out to f3 and queen a4. And finally now, black does break with this move c5, but this is going to cause a few too many weaknesses, I think. We get knight g5, takes, bishop b7. Of course, we want to open things up over here. We're well prepared for it. Queen to f4 now, takes, and at the end of the day, Garry is just winning tactically with some extra material once again. And more pawns on the queen side for white. Garry, again, is able to just win this endgame. Ulf Andersson maybe made the job a little bit too easy by taking on e5, but it was already kind of hopeless. Otherwise, rook e7 is coming in, and you have a lot of trouble. But yeah, this endgame is going to be winning for white. Outside passed pawn is going to be good enough. So sort of zoomed through this game because we're running very, very short on time, and I want to show one more maneuver. But what's the key point? The key point is black plays this early knight h5 move. We want to take on e7, play knight e2. And then there are a variety of plans here. You can go crazy, attack on the king's side. You can play kingside castles and try to keep things at bay with stuff like f3. Or you can do what Garry does. Castle queenside, and then if black meets you on the queen's side, just look to take over this c-file. And again, play very preventatively. Stop black from playing c5, stop black from getting the pawn breaks that he needs to free his pieces. Okay, and that's the story of this game. So quick questions on this before I show the last maneuver that I want to show. Okay, all right, let's move on to finally the last plan that I want to at least introduce you guys to. For this, we're going to look at a game between Kasparov and Barua, who I have been told was the first Indian grandmaster. I did not fact check that. Dennis Borush told me, so we'll see if he's right or not. Don't blame me if I'm wrong. Okay, queen c2, bishop e7. We're going to get all the same moves here. Castles, knight ge2, rook e8, knight f8. So exactly the same position as the first game. But here, instead of this bishop e6, rook c8 setup, we're going to see black go for this move, knight to g6. So this one is a little bit more counterintuitive than the other setup. Why bring this knight to g6? The knight on f8 and all the other variations was a fantastic defensive piece, keeping the king's side together. Well, we'll see black's idea in a moment. We go rook a d1, and then black actually plays this move h6. So what on earth is going on with h6? You know, how does this make sense with putting this knight on g6? What's the idea here?
Forces the trade for the bishop for the knight.
Yeah, it forces the trade of the bishop for the knight. So what is the downside? What is the downside?
You're going to lose a pawn at the end of the capture chain?
Yeah, you might lose a pawn, but also, of course, it just weakens all the squares, even if you don't lose the pawn. So this knight is attacked 2 times. It's no longer defended by the h-pawn. And so after the simple move, takes on f6, takes on f6, takes on g6, takes on g6. Fortunately for black, there's pressure on e3, so we don't quite have time to take here. But these are weaknesses that aren't going to go away. They're just not going to go away. So with this simplification and the removal of all the knights, white is able actually to play this move e4 just directly. And here we'll see that Barua was not actually able to keep control over all these light squared weaknesses in his position. So in the game, he goes g5. And Garry now is able to just expand out with e5 and f4, a plan that we've seen before. And after g takes f4, knight takes f4, white is already going to be just significantly better here. You can do things like occupy the f file. This advanced e5 pawn is going to be very strong. And you can just see how shattered all of these light squares are in the black camp. White's going to use these, occupy these squares, and get a very nice advantage. Now, rook f8 was played, knight g6, take, bishop e6. But now we just bring in the second knight. The knight comes into g3. Again, it's all about the light squares. That's what's been weakened. And we'll see that the light squares are so important that black actually gives up and just sacrifices the rook for the knight. And with that, Garry has pretty much a winning advantage in the game. It took him quite some time to win the game, and maybe he even blew it at some point. But if you're going to end up in exchange out of the opening, then your opening went pretty well. So this was the last little maneuver I wanted to expose you guys to. In this one, our plan is going to remain largely the same. We're still playing for e4, still playing for that big center. But we're just focusing more on using these weak light squares in position. h6 is just weakening these a little bit too much, and white is able to break through over there. By the way, in the game, this move g5 is probably what ensures that black is going to be a lot worse. If you leave this pawn on g6, it's going to give you a little bit of a better chance. For example, takes on e4, takes on e4, and something like bishop g5 might be a better way of trying. Because at least in this instance, can't quite get away with this move e5 as easily. And as for what's going on here, well, it's what it looks like. White has the big center. White's going to try to keep the big center and use it to attack on the king's side, attack on the queen's side, wherever he can find and provoke weaknesses. Okay, and with that, we are, I believe, just in time to end the class before Alex Linderman gets here. If you do have some more time, in-person audience, do stick around because we've got Alex Linderman, fresh from his US Champs performance. He had a very good tournament there. Wasn't quite enough to end up with the victory, but he is our Grandmaster in Residence, and he will be teaching, I believe, Insane in the end game. So this class is more openings focused. If you want to check out an end game class, stay tuned for that. And I just want to thank you guys very much for coming out and learning about chess with me. As always, my name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you next time. Bye. Thank you.